Hi guys, we're here to talk about chapter 13 in Genesis, but first I want to touch on just a few little things left on Genesis 12. One was at the end we see that he's leaving. Pharaoh commands him to leave. Get out of here, right? Same thing that Pharaoh's going to do with Israel when they are in the land and let my people go. Pharaoh's going to say, get out of here, okay? It's going to happen again. And they're going to go with all their things. Well, here we also have Abram leaving with all of his things. But there's a little added treat or bonus, we will say. And that is that when Sarai returns to Abram, she comes with a maid, Hagar. It is believed that Hagar is possibly one of the princesses, either Pharaoh's sister or one of Pharaoh's daughters. And out of respect and honor for Sarai, he gives of his own family to be one of her maids. Again, possibly the thought of joining these two families together. We're going to see that again with Jacob later on in Genesis, where Shechem, they want to join the two families together. So anyway, it doesn't say they're joining the two families together. It's just thought that this is a tradition of what might have been happening, and therefore Hagar is seen as a possible princess or of the royal household. I do also want to say this, that remember the promise in Genesis 12 is that he's going to be made a great nation. He's going to be a blessing to the whole world, his people, right? It doesn't say that Sarai is going to be the mother of the children, and Sarai hasn't had any children yet. The time between chapter 12 to probably chapter the first of 16, we're looking at anywhere between 10 to 12 years, okay? He came in at age 75. I believe, off the top of my head, that Ishmael is born to Abram when he is, I believe, around 86 years old. So that gives us only 11 years. So that's why I say between the 1 to 11 years is when these things are happening. So he's gone into the land. He goes in, and it says in verse 8 of chapter 12 that the Canaanites are there. So that's all, just the Canaanites. It doesn't give a list. And we'll bring that up as significant here shortly. So remember, this isn't long after the Tower of Babel. We're talking 20-something years. So here we go. Coming in is those of Canaan's lines, and coming in are those of Shem's line, right? So we got the two, again, this good and evil working together. Not working together. That's not the right way. Let's put it this way. While the evil is there saying, we're going to worship our false gods, you have the light through Abram who says, I'm worshiping the holy and true God. And by doing that, he's going to be building altars to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's Abram. To the God, the living God, who he's learned about, who created, the creator of all things. All right. And so I just think it's great, because while we know that this land is from Deuteronomy 32:8, this land was already set aside. This is God's land. It was already set aside for Israel. And all the nations were given their land according to the number that's in there. That's going to be in the land of Israel. And that's why Canaan, who's cursed until they're only going to serve, is living in an area that's never going to be theirs. Never meant to be theirs. They're only to be there as servants. Okay, so now let's go to chapter 13. It says, and Abram went up from Egypt into the south, and he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him. All right, this shows that Lot is with him when he goes into Egypt. Going south, that word can also mean the desert. All right, so it could also say that, because think about it. If he is in Egypt, it says going up from Egypt into the south, which is kind of weird because Egypt, well, if you're in Egypt and you're going into Israel, you're actually going north, right? Yeah. Okay, so this south can also be seen as the desert. That would be the southern part of Israel. All right. So Lot goes with them. Let's go look at verse 2. And Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel. Here we are back at the house of the Lord, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai. Or some say Ai, some say I. I'm probably the only person who says Ai, but I don't know how else to say it. to the place of the altar, which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of Yahweh. Okay, remember we saw that in 12:8. He calls on the name. All right. So here we have, he's doing it again. So he's left and he's coming right back to that place. It's interesting. We're going to actually see Jacob do this. When Jacob is leaving his father's house and he's going north, he is going to stop and have the dream of on the ladder. And he says, this is the land. This is the house of God. That's what he says. And then he leaves. But when he comes back, he goes back to that same place and builds another altar and does the same thing. It is great because here we see Abram setting up that pattern. But think about this. When Jesus left, he said, I'm coming right back where the way you see me leaving and where is where I'll come back. He's going to come back and his feet are going to hit the Mount of Olives just like he left from the Mount of Olives. So again, I love this pattern that we see of where it begins and where it ends. Oh, think about the bookends. Where it begins, Garden of Eden. Where it ends, New Jerusalem, right? Hello. I love it. Everything moves in that secular, I think I said it right, secular pattern. A cycle. All right. So he calls on the name of Yahweh. Again, this is the merciful one. This is the one that has called him out. And he's recognizing that, hey, you called me out. I'm following. I'm doing just what you've told me to do. I'm back to the land that you called me to be at. And it says in verse 5, now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. And let's just realize, again, Abram is a very wealthy man. Now, this is not prosperity gospel. This isn't like, oh, well, see, you're going to have all the riches. Abram had all the riches to do the job he needed to do. He was the walking example of who the living God was, right? He was sharing. He was ministering to other people. He was showing the goodness of God to others. His wealth was used to not build cities. He stayed in tents. His wealth was used to be for those around him. Yeah, sure, he lived well also, but my point is he used his wealth properly. And we have to remember that. It says, okay, so Lot's with them. And notice that Lot, he has his own things too, because it says, also had flocks and herds and tents. So Lot is growing as well. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were great. So that they could not dwell together. All right. They're both growing so much that trying to stay as next door neighbors was getting too hard. All right. You know, it talks about in 1 Timothy 3, I think 3 and 5, about when you have strife, that you are to remove yourself from that strife. That's exactly what we're going to see Abram do. It says in verse 7, and there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock, and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. And at that time, now listen, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, I'm not saying this right, the Perizzites, something like that, dwelt in the land. Okay, remember the Canaanites were there first? And if you remember, it was in the area, the same area of around the mountain, right, around Bethel. And now we have two. So there's a new one, also of Cain's line. There's a new group. It's growing. More and more are settling there. They're growing as their own clans, right? All right. So there's strife. You notice that Abram and Lot aren't having strife. It's those who are working for them, those who are out in the field getting their hands dirty, who are having the strife. They're wanting to be in the same land, but they can't. There's too many heads of cattle, too many heads of sheep, too many animals eating to be in one area, so they have to spread out. So Abram said to Lot, let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Now there's the brother part. There's one of the hints that maybe we also have Terah adopting him as well. So he adopted Sarah and also Lot, as well as their sister Milcah. So he says, we're brothers. Let's not do that, right? And again, it may just be, no, it just means that we're close. We're, like in the same family. Could mean that too. Just bringing that to the forefront of your mind to think about how these relationships worked. And so Abram brings this up, and he's like, let's not strive. Because see, when their people are striving, it makes it really easy for them to want to defend their own, and then they could have strife. Think about that. Two best friends, and you have kids, and your kids start to fight, right? And so you're like, you want to defend your child, but at the same time, oh, I don't have a fight with my best friend over my child, but, right? So Abram's like, let's not even have this. Let's not even give the enemy an opportunity, right? Don't give the devil a chance, okay? Don't give an opportunity. So they're like, we're not going to let the enemy have an opportunity. We need to go our separate ways. Now, let's also remember this. Do you remember that it said in chapter 12:1 to leave your relatives? It said that. But Abram brought his brother. He brought Lot with him. All right, let's keep reading. Is not all the land before you? See, separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go right, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plains of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. Before Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the Garden of Eden, like the Garden of Yahweh, it says, like the land of Egypt as you go toward Zohar. All right. So Abram doesn't say, well, I'll take the better. He doesn't even, he's just quiet. And he says, you look at all the land. We could go any directions. You choose where you want to go. Abram is not controlling the situation at all. He's literally saying, I trust God. God's already told me I'm going to be a nation. He's got my back. Where do you want to go? And here's the thought. He looks around, this would be Lot, and Lot sees what looks like the garden. It is so green. If you have been anywhere near the Dead Sea today, it is not so green. It has green spots from all the growth and the farming that's happening, which is miraculous. But it's not this beautiful, lush area that would remind you of the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Yahweh, right? But that's what Lot sees, and he's like, ooh, I'm going there. I'm going where I don't even have to worry about it, right? So he goes, and he goes towards the cities, which I always find that interesting. It says, and Lot chose for himself all of the plain of the Jordan, and Lot moved east. East, that's something to remember. It's often said that he chose the left side. I guess that's the way you should say it. He moved away. He didn't go to the right side. He went to the left side. He moved away from he moved away from Bethel. He moved away from where the Lord was. He could have said, I want this land right here. And Abram would have had to leave. But he didn't. He said, I'll leave. I'll walk away. Which actually works out great. Because Abram, who is promised that land, and Jerusalem area becomes the heart of it, he stays in that area. He doesn't leave it, but Lot does. So he goes that way, right? And I think it's interesting too that here we have Sodom and Gomorrah, these cities, and they're compared to the Garden of Eden. Lot wants to return to that, and we're going to see Lot is in a big problem. Finds himself in a lot of trouble. Sodom and Gomorrah are trying to recreate the idea of the perfect place. And yet in doing that, they end up being some of the filthiest and inhospitable people because man can't do it. You can't do it without the Lord. All right, let's move to verse 12. It says, Abram dwelling, okay, let's do that again. Abram dwelling in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelling in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent as far as Sodom. So Lot is putting his tent in the city, right next to the city. Like he's getting really close to the city. Like, and we came out of the city, and we're supposed to be sojourners. I mean, if Lot's attaching himself to Abraham's goal, then he's to be a sojourner. But he's not. He's just detached himself. He removed himself from the one who's sojourning, who says, this is not mine yet, right? This is not, I'm waiting for something better, right? I'm waiting for the city of God. I'm waiting for that to be my city. And Lot says, well, I'm in tents, but I'm going to go hang out with this city. I see some of Cain in here, right? Wanting to dwell in the city. It says in verse 13, but the men of Sodom were evil and sinned before Yahweh, exceedingly so. I would say maybe if you want to go read Exodus 16, has some interesting things there. You know, the thing about Sodom, they weren't practicing Torah in any way. They were a city. Cain, Nimrod, these are all the things in cities. Everything's congested. You don't have that attachment to land anymore. You don't have that one with nature. You don't have that continual testimony of the beauty of creation that the living God made that testifies to who he is. You lose that when you get into a condensed area. It's a very different feel. And that's where that's where Lot is now going. And the men there were exceedingly bad. They sinned. Now think about it. He's leaving Abram's house, who is a godly house, and he's learning the ways of Yahweh, right? He's walking according to the ways of God. That's what's required in that house. All of Abram's men, all that are in his house. So he's leaving that. I think of it a teenager, right? Ooh, I'm on my own. Goes and maybe doesn't make the best decisions sometimes, right? He's been taught something, and now he's going and he sees, wow, that's not how they work. But he still stays there. It says in verse 14, and after Lot had separated from him, Yahweh said to Abram, now lift up your eyes and look from this place where you are, northward and southward, eastward and westward. Ready? For all the land which you see, I shall give to you and your seed forever. You know what? Lot stood on that same hill and looked and said, oh, I'm going to go over there where it's beautiful. Now that Abram is separated from his family, just like he was told to before, he was told to leave his relatives, yet Lot came with them. Now that Lot's separated, Abram's in the right place, because now this promise is for Abram, not Abram and Lot, not Abram and somebody else in the family, not Abram and Nahor. It's for Abram and his seed, that family. Not even for Abram and the people who he had gathered, the souls he had gathered. It's for Abram and his seed. Going back to Genesis 3, it is the seed of the woman. It is the promised child that defeats the seed of the enemy. It's a very specific line. And the line of Jesus, the line of Messiah, is going to come through Abraham, through Abram. So now he looks over and he's like, that's weird. But that's what Lot just chose. Yeah. But it's yours anyway. It's yours. Abram looks over and realizes that it's all his. It's all going to be his. It's not then he's walking on and going, get out, get out. But he is told, this is your seed. This is forever your land. And it was promised by the living God who owns the land. So he gets to say, he gets the rules. Gets to make the rules, right? Then in verse 16 it says, and I shall make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could count the dust of the earth, your seed also could be counted. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. So Abram moved his tent, and he went and dwelt by the terebinth tree of Merari, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. So he's now moving to Hebron, which is south. So he's up in Jerusalem area, and now he's going south to Hebron. Hebron will be where King David is first crowned, and then he'll move to Jerusalem. But these are the two areas, just kind of so you have an idea. And that's where he goes. And he settles there. He settles there not like he builds a city. He settles there like that's where he's going to stay for a while. All right. Now, I want to bring up really quick, and then I'll end on this. It says, arise and walk through the land, its length and its width. Where his feet walked, and he walked down to Egypt, and he came up from north, right? Where his feet walked, the Lord's like, this is your land. We're going to see that with Israel. He tells them, wherever your feet walk will be yours. And when New Jerusalem comes down, the areas that Israel walked, which is in Saudi Arabia area, all the way up Jordan area, all that, the Nile, all that land will be encompassed in New Jerusalem when it comes. That will be encompassed in, I would suggest possibly when Messiah reigns during the millennium, that will be all encompassed in that kingdom also. I don't know that for sure, but my thought is he has that earthly, and then the heavenly comes down and covers the same land mass that he is ruling. So just realize that there's a lot of patterns being set here by Abram that we'll see again later with Israel as a nation. Because remember, he's the father of the nation, so we follow the tracks of our fathers, of our forefathers. So it says he moved his tent and he went and dwelt in by the trees of Meribah. Now we're going to find out about this area, which is in Hebron, next week, or next time we talk, I should say that. So, wow, I can't believe we actually finished a chapter in one sitting, because, that never happens. Though I'm sure I'll find something else to talk about on that. But, y'all, thanks for sharing time with me, and I hope you have a great evening. Bye.